All right, let's see. Let's talk a little bit about HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So HTML. So HTML, as the name suggests, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Basically, it's the language that browsers use to render content on their windows, right? It's a technology that allows plain content to be formatted for display on the web. It obviously became very, very popular when Tim Berners-Lee first introduced this as a way to easily share research content with his colleagues. It was never intended for selling you anything, for being an application or anything. It was just for sharing research papers amongst research colleagues. But it became very, very popular, and it's just exploded, and now here we are a couple of decades later, and it's just taken over the world. So basically, it's just lots and lots of pointy brackets everywhere. We call these tags or elements, and basically the browser reads this and makes sense out of it. So any page, any web page that you look at, if you right-click on it and click on Inspect, right, you can look at what the browser is looking at. Right, the browser reads the HTML, something that looks like what's on the right-hand side. It parses it, tries to make sense out of it. It will even forgive any minor errors. Right? It'll fill in the blanks for you if you've forgotten to close a tag or misspell something or something doesn't make sense. If you put it in the wrong place, it'll make a best effort at understanding what it is that you meant. Okay, and once it parses it, it makes a mental model of it. Right? It instantiates a whole bunch of objects in memory, and it creates what is referred to as the DOM, or the Document Object Model. Okay. So on the right-hand side over here, you see the result of the browser having parsed your HTML document. Right? And it creates this hierarchy, or all these hierarchical, notice that it's all hierarchical. So it's like a tree, right? It has a root, and then it has lots and lots of branches, and at the end it has leaves. The leaves are actually content, is the actual content. All the other branches is just formatting, right, of telling me that things go on the left, on the right, at the top, at the bottom, what font, what size, where, what formatting. Is it a list? Is it a table? What is it? Okay, but the actual content is at the leaves, right, of this inverted tree, and most modern browsers will allow you to inspect the documents and look at the DOM. Or look at the document object model side by side with the actual content, and then hover over the DOM and say, oh well, this document, this object model on the right-hand side, this is how I'm interpreting it on the left-hand side, right? This is how I am rendering it. Okay, and this is where JavaScript will come in a little later, that will allow us to programmatically modify the right-hand side. Right, to programmatically manipulate the right-hand side, the document object model, right? And as we manipulate programmatically the right-hand side, we'll be able to paint or draw stuff dynamically on the left-hand side, right? And that's how JavaScript today, in Angular or React, right? They all are based on this fundamental principle, right? That underneath there's a JavaScript line of code that is manipulating the DOM. Right? Whether it's changing its position, all right? Whether it's hiding it, or maybe it's showing it, it's changing its background color, or adding brand new content, or deleting content that's there. It's all done through JavaScript dynamically. Right? This is opposed to this content having been dynamically generated on the server side. Right? But that would have been another alternative, right? And actually, for most of web development, the history of web development, content was generated dynamically on the server side, right, by technologies such as ASP, JSPs, PHP, Python, right? All these technologies are still around, and that is still a technique, right, where this HTML here, this right-hand side, has been generated dynamically on the server, right? So where you have code and logic that generates this, and by the time it gets to the client, by the time the browser sees it, it's already been generated. As far as the browser is concerned, this is a static, dead HTML, right? It's not dynamic at all, okay? From the server's point of view, it's dynamic, but not from the client's point of view. Earlier in this decade, there was a shift in the way we decided to implement web applications. And today, the modern way is not to generate the dynamic content on the server, but generate the dynamic content on the client. Right? We've been doing it a little bit for a couple of decades using JavaScript, little things here and there, animations and maybe validating forms and things like that. But once Google got in the game and all these big players that they were betting their business on the web, they made huge strides to rethink how to build web applications from the client side, not from the server side. And that's where we're going to be focusing this semester. Dynamic content generation on the client, not on the server. Okay. All right. Let's go back where we were. My wife was saying the other day, how can you understand any of this? She was looking at the right-hand side. It says it's just looking like at the Matrix, that you see all this blurb, just gibberish going down the screen, and it says, well, no, I don't see this. I see, I see slides, I see images, I see videos, I see. I don't see this anymore. It's like the Matrix. All right, so let's continue. Oh, can I close this? No, I can't close it. All right, so HTML. So HTML, again, it's just a technology that describes how things are going to be rendered. H1 for headers, right? Things that are large, like for introductory things, right? You have paragraphs, long-running text that adds vertical spacing. We have lists that you can have where things are either numbered or all are grouped together, presumably under a similar rubric or under a similar type of thing, of content. So here's a list of courses, list of semesters. Tables allow us to generate content that spans across multiple columns, across multiple rows. So here we have some headers for a first row that has headers, and then several rows down below that define the different rows of contents, right? The different different rows. Now the tables were misused for quite a while, since HTML doesn't have a native way of displaying content side by side in columns, right? And a very popular way of displaying large pieces of content is to break it up into columns, right? We've been doing that in magazines and newspapers. It's a very common way of publishing things, right? But HTML did not have a native way of doing that. So for the longest time, we used tables to do that, right? We misused tables, because it allowed us to have, format things side by side. Don't do that, right? That's a misuse of tables. Tables were not meant for that. They were meant for tabular data, right? Where you have, you have each row perhaps a part of a record, where you have a descriptor at the top saying what it is, what that column is, and they all have the same data type, right? So strings or passwords or dates or numbers or salaries or whatever, right? So do not misuse tables. We'll take a look at how to render things side by side a little later using CSS. Then we have forms, right? So folks can type in their content and submit a piece of data, a set of data to the server for the server to process. And the default behavior is that a form reads your input fields, looks at what the person typed, and packages it all up, and then it submits it to the server. Right? That's the default, right? Where typically you have a submit button at the bottom, and when you click on that, it submits it. We're not going to do that, right? That's the default behavior, right? That's the old school of doing that. Instead, we're going to use JavaScript to do that, right? It'll be JavaScript who's going to take a look at your content, maybe do some validation, maybe massage your data a little bit, maybe format it in a particular data format, right? And then send it over to the server, right? But we're not going to use the default behavior of forms. Right? Obviously, you have all sorts of widgets, and as much as we can, we should use the correct data type for whatever data type we're capturing. Right? For instance, we would not use a string to capture a date. Right? If you be as strongly typed as you can, right, to avoid users mistyping things into the content, maybe fat fingering something in there that they didn't intend. As much as you can, maybe create a pull down, a drop down, or checkboxes, or radio buttons, right? So that the user, to minimize any errors, right? Any mistakes that the user might incur, right? So here we are using a date type. So type is date, okay? And that gives you a widget. It's also useful because this is also honored on mobile phones, right? So on the mobile phone, if you use the correct data type, the phone will provide the right keyboard, right, to type in whatever entry you want, right? So if you say that it's numeric, it'll bring up the numeric keypad, right? If this is an email, it'll bring up the email keypad, and that's very convenient for the user, right? Instead, if you don't give the data type, everything's a string, right? So the browser on the mobile phone has no choice but to display the entire keyboard, right? So I hate that when they're asking me for a number and they show me the entire keyboard, right? It's very annoying, right, to have to type numbers on that small keypad. So use the correct data type, right, and so it'll be useful for. Here's drop downs. Again, allows folks to select from a large selection. Again, honored by the browsers on the phones, right? They'll give you the scrolly, the way you can scroll from many options. Also notice the select. Notice that it has multiple options. Typically, when this gets submitted to the server, you can either submit the text that is being displayed, in this case, admin, or you can provide an actual value that will be the value of the whole select, right? The actual value as a string. Typically, it would be some kind of token, a well-defined token that describes the value of that select, that perhaps matches some value on the server as well. Radio buttons that allows you to create, either multiple choice or single choice, mutually exclusive values. So radios allow you to declare things that are mutually exclusive. That if you click one, it'll unselect the other, or check boxes if multiple apply. Notice here that we are using label. Right, we're using label. We're putting the input field inside of a label. That means that everything inside becomes clickable. Right, even the text becomes clickable. Right, so if this is a long piece of text, right, and if it's inside of a label, then even the text can be clicked. So if you click anywhere in the text, the radio buttons get selected as well. Right, that's very convenient, especially on a phone, right, where the radio buttons and the checkboxes are tiny, right, and they're very hard to peck at it with a finger. Right, but if you make the entire text clickable, you make it so much more useful for the end user. Yes, right. So as a requirement in the assignments and in your projects, right, we will be looking for these for you to be applying good practices on to make things easier for humans. We have these meat sticks that we type with, right? Yeah, same thing for the input fields. Right? So the input fields, as we'll see in a minute, we'll want to make them as big as possible, right? So that users on a phone, right, can just very easily just touch that anywhere in the input field. Typically they would be styled as blocks, so they take the entire screen, so that it'd be easier to tap on them. Right, the default is really tiny. What else? Obviously buttons, right? That allow you to generate actions. Anchors allow you to navigate to different places, to different websites. Now, the default behavior, as you might know, is that if you have an anchor, if you click on that anchor, the default behavior is that the entire page gets replaced with whatever page we're pointing to, right? That's the default behavior, right? That we will do this week, right? And then never again, right? Starting next week, we're not going to do that anymore, right? Instead, we're not going to use anchors. We're not going to use their default behavior, right? We'll do it this week just to get a feel for it and play around with it, how things used to be done. And then next week, when we introduce React, and later on, Angular, we'll use single-page applications where you never navigate away. Okay, you always stay in the same page all throughout. So anchors, right? So we'll work on anchors a little later. All right, so let's build something. Let's build a couple of pages in the user admin. Let's build a couple things.